Hi, everyone. I'm Sherri Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director for the Institute for Health and Social Equity. Our mission is to reduce health disparities by improving the health and social equity of vulnerable populations and underrepresented groups. Our focus is on motivating and inspiring historically underrepresented students who are majoring or pursuing careers in health and science fields. Today marks our second episode of our Health and Science Career Series, where we highlight unsung heroes. And unsung heroes are individuals that we may come across on a daily basis and may not otherwise have known their stories. And so we believe in lifting as we climb and helping those coming behind us so that they too may achieve. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So for those who have been with us since 2016, and for those of you who are new supporters of the Institute, we were founded in 2016 as a 501c3 organization under the name the Wilson Initiative for Health and Social Equity. We recently changed our name to the Institute for Health and Social Equity to further align with our mission and our commitment to education. So why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a wonderful guest for you this evening. We will introduce our guest, interview our guest, and then open up the floor for the last 30 minutes of the show for questions. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So our focus for tonight is the field of nursing. And I'd like to introduce you to this evening's guest. She is someone who is very much committed to the future of nursing and someone who's committed to educate the public about AfroLatinx issues in order to eradicate racism in this country. Dr. Jackeline Biddle-Richard began her nursing career as an intensive care nurse, an ICU nurse, and she worked at various level 1 trauma centers in New Jersey. And I think we have some photos of Dr. Biddle-Richard. She transitioned into higher education after serving as a manager of clinical education and practice for a healthcare system in New Jersey. In higher education, she most recently served as Dean of Nursing for an LVN program, an Associate Dean of Nursing, and Assistant Professor for a Baccalaureate Nursing program as well. As a certified nurse educator, she is also taught online in the Lab Sim for the ADN Accelerated BSN, MSN, and DNP programs. As a licensed attorney in New York and New Jersey, she was an associate in a medical malpractice firm prior to opening her own law firm, where she focused primarily on criminal law, personal injury, and nursing liability. At present, she serves as the president of the Texas chapter of the Association of Nurse Attorneys. She is a member of the Texas Nurses Association El Paso chapter and a member of the National Black Nurses Association. After her own experience of racism within the Latino community, Dr. Biddle-Richard founded Soy Maravillosa, an Afro-Latinx initiative to amplify the voice of Afro-Latinos in healthcare, education, and professional organizations. Her career in nursing, law, and education provided a fundamental foundation to fight for health equity, social justice, and advocate against anti-Black racism for the most vulnerable. The purpose of Soy Maravillosa is to raise awareness and provide education about the Afro-Latino experience, history, and customs to shed light on the invisible status to end racism. Dr. Biddle-Richard is also a higher education consultant and clinical assistant professor for a university in El Paso, Texas. She earned her associate in applied science at Brookdale Community College, her BSN at Monmouth University, her Juris Doctor at Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and her Doctor of Nursing Practice, DNP, at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. And for fun, she enjoys spending time with her Chihuahua and Puggle, Latin dancing, reading, and the arts. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Jackeline Biddle-Richard. Welcome, Dr. Richard.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, you've had a very successful career as a nurse, an attorney, an educator, a consultant. Can you share a little bit more about your career journey?
Sure. I started off my nursing journey in an associate's degree program. And after that, I started working in the ICU and went on to get my RN to BSN. And through that journey, I decided I wanted to go to law school, which was a lifelong dream, really. So I went to law school, became an attorney. And later on, after I kind of got into education in the hospitals, I realized that's something I wanted to do a little more. So that's why I went back and I got my DMP. And here I am.
Yes, here you are. Here you are. Your career journey is very inspirational. I'd like to know, what barriers did you experience during grade school or along your career journey?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll start during grade school. I was English as second language. Can't tell now. I worked very hard at it, but I was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the States permanently when I was about maybe 8 or 9. And at that time, I was living in Virginia, where you really didn't have. I mean, this whole concept of English as second language, we didn't have that. You either spoke English or you didn't, or and if you did, with the kids and everything out there, you couldn't have an accent because otherwise you were going to get bullied and pushed around, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, my first barrier that I had, and that happened in grade school. Really, by the time I got to junior high school, I was better able to blend in terms of that. But it was very difficult being a Black little girl who spoke Spanish. That's all of a sudden dropped in a world where you were either Black or white, and there was no space for someone that fit my description, really.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting because today being bilingual is an asset. So when did you realize that being bilingual was in fact an asset?
Well, I actually I realized that after I moved to New Jersey, actually after I became a nurse, right? Because at that time, when I became a nurse, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, we don't know who she is. We don't know anything about her, but we know she speaks Spanish. We need her in this room with this patient right now. So I would get pulled in all directions. But, it's funny because I almost didn't even get to the point of being a nurse, because another challenge that I faced was racism, really, during nursing school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And during my associate degree journey, I was actually kicked out of nursing school. And as it turns out, I was bullied by a clinical instructor. I mean, I was terrified of this woman, up to the point where literally she cornered me one day and I couldn't even get words out of my mouth. Not because I wasn't prepared, but because I was terrified of her. She kicked me out of clinical, and then I was told that I failed an exam. And as it turns out, after fighting back and after having to go to the president of the entire college, who told the dean she had to show me my scores, and it turns out I didn't fail the exam. So of course they had to take me back, but I lost the whole term because of that. And it was something that really, that particular barrier was something that stayed with me for years. For years. But yeah, once I moved to New Jersey, it was so different than Virginia. It was like, I couldn't believe there was Spanish Station. There was people, neighbors who were Puerto Rican, you know, you had places to go. You know, it was a whole different scene. So it was almost like I started, you know, feeling like, oh my gosh, I can let this secret out, right? And nobody's going to like ask me questions or anything like that. So that's you know, in terms of my Spanish speaking, that's where it became needed, right? That's where, you know, that I felt it was an asset.
And you know, just listening to your story, it's very disheartening even to this day. Racism in nursing school, right? When you look at different studies, and I think we have a slide up on regarding attrition rates in nursing school. So as a nursing school educator, you could probably appreciate this, that you know, one of the biggest documented reasons that historically underrepresented students or students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds may not finish nursing school once they get in is the lack of support system and the discrimination, the racism. So, you know, the fact that you experience that, and it's still happening to this day, is very discouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm talking about over 30 years ago, and you're absolutely right that it's still happening today.
So going back to your new nonprofit, Soy Maravillosa.
Very good.
Thank you. I've been practicing. What was the impetus behind you starting this nonprofit organization?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it was racism was actually, you know, what caused it, and it's racism specifically in the Latino community, and I felt that this was the time and place, and there is a need to really start speaking out about it and start speaking up for people who are Afro-Latinos. And people who are, because, you know, you have to realize that you're Afro-Latino, you know, it so happens that, you know, I went through what I went through as a child. So I had to scrub my Latino, you know, the way I spoke, my accent, all of that. But there are many out there who are really coming from Latin American countries. They have immigration issues, they have language issues, just like everybody else. But they're in this category that they get put at the bottom, you know, within the Latino, this category, and also obviously face racism that every Black person faces, plus racism within the Latino.
Thank you for that. It's you know, the fact that we're just dealing with racism just in general, and how racism impacts our health outcomes. And then another layer with racism, you know, within our own communities and within AfroLatinx communities. You know, I just wonder what the statistics are regarding that, or if it's even reported at all.
Right, and I have looked at statistics, and actually I've looked at statistics that actually looked at different types of demographics of within the Latino community, and here's the interesting part, that because Latinos in general, whether they're Black or not, they don't, you know, for example, statistics on who gets, you know, arrested more, who gets face discrimination more, because many of them are immigrants, right? They don't get involved with that. So they're not reporting. But here's what one of the data that I found showed that people actually who identify as Afro-Latino and are more in the age group of like 18 and I believe 29, they actually report a higher level of discrimination than anybody else in the Latino demographic. So the younger folks are like, we know discrimination, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna call it out. But the older folks, they're so used to that. You don't talk about race. You don't, that's not something you talk about, because that's what goes on within the Latino community, that you don't talk about race. So it's almost like, we all should be happy to even be considered a Latino. And, you don't talk about race. And but this younger demographic is saying, yeah, we face discrimination. And when they look at the numbers, it's higher discrimination than white and light Latinos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So through your lens, what can be done to address racism within the Afro-Latinx community?
Right. I think, and this is really, it's important. It's different. Let me just start off by saying this. As an Afro-Latino, when we identify as Afro-Latino, and it's kind of like we're saying the obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it causes discord within the Latino community, even within people's family, within your own family. You could be kind of like ostracized because why are you calling yourself Afro-Latino? Which is obvious, right? I mean, so there's 4 things that I think are very important that needs to happen within the Latino community to really start to then get to the next steps of dealing with racism. Number 1 is that the Afro-Latino community has to understand that when we're using the term Latino, or whether we're Puerto Riqueño or Colombian or whatever, that's more of a nationality, an ethnicity. The term
Mm-hmm.
Latino is meant to capture that. It's not a race,
Right?
So,
Mm-hmm.
so Afro-Latinos need to understand that if you're Black, that is your race, right? So it needs to be separated out, because it's usually very nationalistic and very tied to that Latino or that national place, wherever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can't separate that out. So that's number 1. The second thing that needs to happen is that, and this is actually for Latinos, but who are probably confused like I used to be, and for people who are non-Latinos, they have to understand that, yeah, you can have somebody who's Black and Latino at the same time.
Yes.
And as Afro-Latino, you don't have to feel like, oh my God, if I declare that I am that I am African descendant, I am no longer a Latino, or I'm no longer Puerto Rican. No, you're both. You
Mm-hmm.
both live together. The third thing is that Latinos, Afro-Latinos in particular, need to recognize that racism exists within the Latino community. And the Latino community needs to reckon with it. The Afro-Latino community needs to reckon with it, but it needs to be stated. It needs to be said. It needs to be talked about, right? Because if we continue the silence as a group in terms of being Afro-Latinos, we will continue to be invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And the 4th thing that I think is very important is that Afro-Latinos, and again, this is super strange, but it's true. Afro-Latinos need to, in terms of the fact that they don't do this, a lot of them do not do this, is that they need to embrace being African descendants, because it is empowerment. It is a vehicle to empowerment. Right? Because if you're invisible, if you're just part of this category and you're invisible, you cannot be empowered being invisible.
Mm-hmm.
So those are
Absolutely.
four very important things I think that need to happen within, in particular, within the Afro-Latino community, the Black Latino community, and that those things need to happen.
Thank you. One of the things that stood out to me as I'm listening to you is the term invisible, and another term, hidden in plain sight. You know, so I'd like to share some photos that you shared earlier with our viewers, because there's Afro Latino contributors in the world today, and people may not know.
And have
So
been for a long time.
yeah.
These are what I called oldie but goodies, okay? This is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. He was actually a Puerto Rican and identified himself as Afro-Puerto Rican or Black Puerto Rican because his mother was Black. And he's very, you know, he's just a figure to know in terms of contribution to the African, even the African American diaspora, because he is he was a collector. He was actually an avid collector of everything Africa, everything African, and eventually he ended up having the Schomburg Center for Research, which is within, I believe, the New York Public Library, but it's in Harlem, it's in New York. And if you really want to get good information about African American, anything African, it will be there. And obviously Afro-Latino information as well. But I wanted to bring him, you know, to show him, only to say, listen, we have figures that have actually contributed to the African American diaspora as well, and the American. This is Miriam Jimenez Roman. So this woman, I mean, she was a trailblazer. She was somebody who was actually born in Puerto Rico. She's a Puerto Rican, but her family moved to New York when she was very young. And she passed away, I believe, last year, but she was a professor. She wore all kinds of different hats, did all kinds of different things. But my connection to her is that she wrote this really wonderful anthology of Afro Latino history, and I believe it's called the Afro Latina Reader, and then History and Culture, and I think it's in the U.S. History and Culture in the U.S. It is the book that you want to have if you really want to hear real stories from real Afro-Latinas, and really also a critique of it, right? An intellectual, high-level critique. And she was one of the editors of that book. So that's why she's important to me, but she has a huge, you know, body of work that she's done, and obviously an activist as, you know, an Afro-Latina in any event. So that's why I wanted to talk about her. And of course we have Victoria Santa Cruz, who this woman, this was what I call a badass, okay? She's an Afro-Peruvian, actually. And back in the, you know, 50s, 60s, this woman was talking about Afro-Latina, Afro-Latinidad. She dedicated her career as a dancer and actor, really talking about that and talking about the racism in Peru against their own African descendants. And she's very well known. She's known for a lot, again, a whole huge body of work. But the reason I know her is because of a poem that she performed. I think she wrote the poem, but I know she performs it. And it's called Me Gritaron Negra, which literally translate to, they screamed at me, I'm Black, basically. That's like, and when you listen to the poem, it's really talking about this 5-year-old little girl that you know, she's 5, she's playing with different people there, you know, and all of a sudden a neighbor moves in and decides to call her, just call her Black, and keep calling her Black and Black, and doing it in a way that obviously it's offensive. It's a 5-year-old. She didn't even know she was Black. She didn't even know what that meant. But you know, it's kind of like that, coming into your Blackness, and even talking about it just makes my hairs just kind of, because it really is impactful. So I would say, you know, if anybody want to look her up on YouTube, when you hear her say it, you know, recite that poem, it is powerful, and it is really, for me, such a wonderful way of really taking ownership of who you are as a Black person. So I love her. She's gone. I think she passed in 2014. But you know, there are actually lots and lots and lots of folks out there now in the mainstream media who are Afro-Latino, identify as Afro-Latino. Amara La Negra is one of them. And I didn't put her picture there because I'm sure a lot of folks know who she is. The interesting thing that I don't know if people realize, that her name actually means you will love the Black woman. That's what that name means. That's a stage name. So it's, and so when you're saying it, right? You're saying, you know, you will love the Black woman, you know. So so for me, that was interesting about her name. I really don't know too much about her, but I know she's really talking, you know, speaking out, you know, regarding being Afro-Latina. So that's you know, and there's others in the music industry and all that.
Well, Dr. Richard, thank you so much. And for those who are interested or would like to learn more about Soy Maravillosa, Dr. Richard's website is soymaravillosa.org. I have a few other housekeeping items. I wanted to let everyone know that we do have scholarships available. We will be sending out additional information, but for those who are interested, we have we will be awarding scholarships this spring for nursing, public health, and STEM fields for college students or seniors pursuing that have been accepted to programs there. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And that information will be on our Facebook page. So, Dr. Biddle, I have some questions for you. These questions are actually related to your career and your journey. And the first one is, what are you most proud of?
Oh gosh, I other than being a mom, I'll tell you something. I've had little bits of things that happen along the way that that I'm proud of. I mean, for nursing, actually, one of my first things that I became proud of in nursing was actually years and years and years later when I got into education. I remember getting into education. I was, you know, pretty new at it and just very gung-ho. I didn't know all the background kind of stuff about teaching or anything yet, but I just remember having this group of students. I was literally teaching clinical, and from one day to the next was told, listen, our teacher for this class left and I need you to cover that class to the end of the semester. It was a group of students that they were failing. It was a motley crew in there going on. It was not a good situation. I really dug in with those students. I really shared the resources I had with those students. Those students actually perform the highest than any of the other schools, because it was one of those places where they had different campuses. When they took the final exam for that class, they scored higher on average than any of the other schools. And I was always just real proud of that, because to me, it wasn't, I didn't perform. It wasn't me that got the high grades, but the fact that I had an impact on those students to the point that, not only did they went from being, I was told these students they have issues, all kinds of things, but I gave them support, I gave them resources, and they performed. And so that, to me, that's something that has happened that's very important. And of course, when I was practicing law, the very first time I was sent to argue a case in the appellate division, which is kind of like a big deal, I actually won the case, and it was published, which meaning published means I don't know if you guys ever see like Law and Order, and every time they show the prosecutors, you see the books in the back. Mm-hmm. Well, those books actually had cases in there, right? So my case, made it to one of those books, and I've always been kind of proud of that, since, some attorneys go their whole career without ever having a published case. But as you can see, there's a lot of those books, right? So there's a lot of published cases.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Is there anything else you want to accomplish in your career? Is another question.
I'll tell you something. I'm at the point of my life and my career where I'm not really guided by, some big plan or anything like that. Other than my Soy Maravillosa work, that's something that I'm definitely dedicating the rest of my life to. But in terms of career, I just think that I've accomplished the things that I wanted to accomplish career-wise. And whatever I do from this point on, it would be just enhancing that, right? So it wouldn't really be any major changes, but just something that enhances these wonderful career that I've managed to, create for myself in nursing and in law and in education.
And for our viewers, the name of Dr. Biddle-Richard's foundation is Soy Maravillosa.org is the website. So another question we have is, what risks did you take along your career journey?
Oh gosh, I think taking the journey was a risk, mm-hmm. When you think about it. I mean, I really, I didn't come from a family of people who, went to like college or anything like that. I mean, my mother was an LPN. She was an LPN, but other than that, it wasn't like I had people that I could fall back on and that kind of stuff. So for me, entering these different spaces, in nursing, getting through nursing school was one thing, right? Having to, be kicked out literally and then reinstated, and then starting, the risk, oh my gosh, starting nursing, my first year in nursing, after my first year, the unit that I worked on, which was a med-surg unit, closed. It was a 14-bed med-surg unit. I didn't know how good I had it, okay? And because I became friendly with the house supervisor at night, she kept asking me, well, what are you going to do, Jack? Your unit is going to close, in like 3 months. What are you going to do? You should come to ICU with me. I'm like, I'm not smart enough for that. I'll tell you what I experienced in nursing school was traumatic. Like that never really left me. So I actually applied for another unit on, that was a step down unit. And I was not hired. I was told I didn't have enough experience and whatever. But guess what? I was hired in the ICU. And that's where I spent the rest of my career. And for me, that was a risk because I was so scared. I didn't, you know, going to the ICU was the last thing that I ever thought that I was smart enough to do. So for me to actually, you know, take that risk, go to the interview, you know, follow through with that, really put me in a whole better position. I mean, as a nurse, and actually put me in a position that I ended up really loving. You know, I ended up learning a lot and really loving it. You know, going to law school was a risk. But one of the things is that I never asked permission. You know, I always, you know, usually people are in this kind of mindset that, oh, I'm going to do this. Let me pick your brain. Let me ask for make your decision and do the steps to get there and do it. I mean, that's basically what I did. I didn't ask anybody permission about whether or not, what do you think? I want to try to get into law school. What do you think? That, you know, that wasn't somebody else's decision to be made. And I just find sometimes, because you know what happens when you start asking permission, and I do call that asking permission, when you start asking everybody else what they think about something that you're going to do, you're going to get the person or people who are going to say, you know, maybe not now. I don't know. You don't have enough money. That you're going to incur a lot of debt. You're going to, you know, oh, you got the grades for that, you know. So there's going to be those kind of folks that want to bring you to wherever they are, and it may not be down. It may be wherever they are, right? But that's not where you want to be. So, so to get to where you want to be, you have to be able to, you know, take those chances for yourself, but don't put yourself in a position where other people are just going to, you know, be a damper on it.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was, to me, as we were preparing for this, was that you actually wanted to be an attorney first.
Yes.
Before being a nurse. And so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and I just want to say something right now. I'm so sorry. My dog is sleeping and she's snoring. So
I don't think we can hear her.
I'm gonna try to talk real loud. I just gave her a treat, so I'm sorry about that.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, I have treats here, so I'll take care of that. Okay, little girl. Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm sorry. What was the question?
If you could talk about you wanting to actually go to law school first.
Absolutely. I did. I wanted to be a lawyer from, oh my gosh, probably when I was a teen. Even though when I was a teen, I was heavy into, fashion design. That's what I majored in high school. But anyway, I did want to be a lawyer. I just never thought that, first off, someone like me, coming from my background, right? I don't know any lawyers. Nobody in my family, you know, has a college degree, much less a lawyer. So that was the mentality that I grew up with, that thinking that, you know, I went to school in that era, that although I did go to a very good high school, actually, there wasn't still that support. It was kind of like, you know, certain students got pushed in one direction and other students got pushed in another direction. So it kind of was something that over time, like when I was in, actually when I was doing my associate program, one of my classmates had somebody in her family who was in law school, and they were not rich, right? They were just regular folk. So I'm thinking, well, geez, maybe I could, you know, maybe I could do that, you know? So I started actually reading. I got, you know, books and stuff. And I literally, you know, got the book that showed me how to get into law school. And I did everything they said, and I got in. I passed my you know, my exams to get in and everything, and I was able to get into all of my the law schools I applied. But yes, I actually was something that was in my mind, but to make it come to fruition, it was a journey, because it wasn't like I felt that confident about it when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like, thank you. Looks like we have another question. What you describe as imposter syndrome, how can we best support our nursing students through the journey to help them overcome and feel empowered?
Right. So imposter syndrome, actually, I'll tell you something, just a little, background. I didn't know what imposter syndrome was until I read the book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. That was the first time ever when she described it. I'm like, well, that's the way I am all the time. Like, I always feel that way. But I didn't know that was imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is really this overwhelming fear that anytime you're in any situation, it doesn't matter if the truth is that you are capable and you are knowledgeable, but you feel like you're not, and that you're not measuring up, and that someone is going to find out, right? So it's that overwhelming fear that someone will find out that really you don't belong here. You got in the ICU, you don't belong here. You got into this firm, you don't belong here. You got into this school, you don't belong here. And that is an overwhelming fear. I lived through that through nursing school. I lived through that my first 5 years of nursing. I lived through that through law school. And really, up to the point I read that book, even after I became a lawyer, I always felt like that. When I was in court, I never felt I measured up to the other attorneys. It didn't matter that judges were telling me, oh, I really like your brief, your writing is great. That I was giving advice to other people, that my clients like me. It didn't matter. I felt like somebody was going to find out. And that's a horrible feeling. So how can we best support our nursing students? I think number one, because I'm one of those that always believe you got to call things out, right? So it needs to be called out. It needs to be called out. Basically, I just feel like faculty and the schools ought to have something to help students understand this is a phenomena. It happens, right? It happens to the best of us, right? And this is the things that you can do. I mean, one of the things I think that's important is really being supportive to the students in terms of, depending on what their issues are. Because like I said, it's really inside of you. And so everybody, it's not like a cookie cutter where you could say, okay, well, this is the kind of thing that's going to work to combat imposter syndrome. So it's really getting to know students and seeing what they will benefit from. But the first thing is calling it out. Listen, you're going to feel this way. These kind of thoughts might go through your mind. This is what it is. This is what it is. And if you feel that way, come talk to me. Or maybe even the school having some kind of different programs for students to go and start to feel more confident. But it needs to be called out, because that's the thing. I was going through this all of this time, and until I read it in that book, I didn't know that that's what it was called.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Jackie Biddle-Richard, for joining us and for being our guest and for educating us on AfroLatinx issues and racism, and in our own community. So thank you for that. I want to remind everyone that we are putting updates about the Institute for Health and Social Equity on our Facebook page. Please be on the lookout for our scholarships that are coming up. And our next series, our next episode will be coming up pretty soon, and we'll be highlighting a physician. More info to follow. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.